Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am here with two fantastic writers who are here to talk about an absolutely thrilling and riveting collaboration. So let's hop right into our interview. Could I ask you to introduce yourselves, please, and your book?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Carson Winter. I am the co-author of Posthaste Manor.
My name is Jolie Toomajan, and I am the other author of Posthaste Manor.
Thank you so much for joining us. As I was saying just before we hit record, this book was fantastic, and I read it like impossibly fast. Like, I am not a terribly fast reader, and I could not put this one down. But before we get too much into the book itself, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about your journey to the book. Could you tell me a little bit about your careers and how this collaboration came to be?
Sure, no problem. I've been writing for semi-seriously for about a decade now. That doesn't mean I've been getting published for a decade. I've been writing very bad stories very quietly for a while, and now people are just starting to see the good ones that come out every once in a while. Jolie and I run in some of the same writing circles. We're both horror weird writers, and we were in the same writing group. And I had just finished up another project, and I was looking to kind of collaborate with another author, one that I really admired. And Jolie was had just announced that she had a story get into Black Static, which in our circles is a very, very big deal. Black Static is like one of the big horror mags. So when you hear one of your other like hopeful, desperate amateurs just got into Black Static, you're like, oh, holy shit, this person must be serious business. So I immediately was like, hey, Jolie, let me tie myself to your coattails as you rocket towards the stratosphere. And yeah, that's kind of how Posthaste Manor came about. You know, I was looking for a project, something to do outside of the bounds of the regular publishing submission process, which is a huge grind. And we were initially just trying to like self-pub or something, and it turned out really, really well.
So I am an academic in general. I've got a ton of education. I've got an MFA. I'm finishing my PhD in 3 weeks. And so I've been writing for a long time, but I haven't been trying to get published for a long time because I've sort of been just like working. Do you know what I mean? To like eat. And so it's not really a thing that I get to do much. And over the course of like writing my dissertation, I had taken about an 8-year break from writing anything to sort of get my life under control. And over the course of working on my dissertation, I realized that I needed a break from all of the like heavy academic stuff. And I started getting back into writing fiction again. And I started placing stories, and I ended up in a writer's group with Carson, which, speaking of dream publications, he's got a story in Apex, which is another one of those, which is another one of those like, holy, you did it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, even if it's not me, it's like bust out the champagne time. Like one of us did it. It is being next to greatness. And his story in Apex in Haskins, in my opinion, is destined to be a classic. It is an incredibly well-built story. It is so creepy. It does and says so much. And so when he asked me to work with him and I realized he was serious, I like jumped on it. Like, yeah, let's do this immediately. And yeah, that's sort of how it started. Is we're in a writing group together and we decided to like bounce ideas off each other until a book stuck.
And I think it's fair to mention that Jolie has now slayed the Apex Beast too, and her story's coming out this year? This next month? It's coming out
next
right,
month,
Jolie?
November.
Yeah. And it is a banger. I can't wait for people to read it.
Wow, that's so
Oh,
exciting. That's so much cool publication stuff happening like all at once, including
Yeah.
a dissertation defense
I
presentation.
know.
So,
I know. I don't know how I've survived the last 6 weeks of my life, and I don't know how I'm going to survive the next 6 weeks. We're just going to head down straight through. Like,
well, one of my questions actually was going to be who is the academic? Because this book has a portrayal of an academic writing a dissertation that felt so real to me. So I am like in libraries now as a sort of recovering PhD. I finished and I was
Mhm.
like, and that's that. Like, let's
Same. I'm out of here,
yeah.
man. God, I can't do this anymore. I want to go back to being a medical editor where people don't do this to me. Yes.
Yeah, it was just so real about that, like, working so hard towards something that is like like structurally becoming like not so much a place where jobs are, and like it's just it's a lot. So I sort of like totally sympathize. I did not mean to derail with like my own issues, but
No, it was me. And I actually my advisor doesn't know about this book yet. And I feel like before I tell her about it, I have to be like, this is not you, and I'm fine. Like, I don't think it. Like, I'm fine, and this is not about you. This is about how much education do I have now? 300 years. 300 years of frustration with that kind of institutional brouhaha. And yeah, that is what came out in that story. That was all me.
well, and your research is about the weird as well too. So did you bring some of that research to this project or to your writing in general?
I do. I am very so basically I study, my archive is a bunch of American women writers who wrote predominantly for Weird Tales, 15, 20, 30 stories each, who were these huge contributors. And in doing so, I have found a bunch of authors who I now just fangirl for, and who I really have sort of looked at them and gone, so this is how they do it. Because a lot of their work, even reading it, I'm like, what year was this published? And I feel, you know what I mean? It feels very fresh and very interesting. And so I take a lot from the pulp in terms of that kind of like campy little like wink that they do with things that influences me a lot. I think I brought a lot of that to Posthaste. Because you could tell a lot of the times with the pulp, though they were writing serious things, they had fun with it. It was like aliens and ray guns and cosmic horror. And so that kind of fun was what I wanted to bring, especially into this book.
Nice. And for you, Carson, was there like did this collaboration sort of like bring new stuff to your own writing process, or did you find yourself like learning new things like in the process of this project?
I mean, I think I learned a lot about collaboration and how to make a successful collaboration through the project. I mean, for me, it was a little bit of a different thing. I think it was a different thing for both of us because we hadn't ever co-authored before a single project. And I think in my mind, I've always had even a little bit of a negative impression of co-writing, because I'm an art for art's sake nerd, and like the singular authorial voice to me is very, very important. It's why I read. I want to spread that over two people. To me, seems like it dilutes the idea of a singular communication from reader to audience. But in that also kind of makes it tantalizing in a way, because if you see there's a form that doesn't necessarily vibe with you, at least for me, that means I want to tackle it and try to make it work for me in a fun way. So it was kind of a fun challenge, and I think through the our kind of fundamental structuring, our discussions on it, we found ways to really preserve each other's voice and strengthen each other throughout it, rather than kind of smoothing out all the fun stuff Jolie and I do separately. We kind of leaned into what we do and just ran with it and found ways to interconnect throughout the process.
Nice. So what was can you talk a little bit about that structure and how you split up the writing? Because one, the structure is really like one of the things that makes the story really engaging and really mystifying in that you sort of you learn things in a really interesting sort of chronological way about what's going on in the house. Yeah, so can you talk about how you landed on that structure and sort of how you like what were the practical parts of how that collaboration worked?
It was a lot of well, at the beginning, the way we initiated the project, we said we were going to do 10 short stories, 5 short stories each. They're going to take place in the same haunted house. And that's the second half of the book as it is now. I started writing mine during NaNoWriMo of last year, and I knocked mine out within, I think the first week or so, without a real plan. It was just, I was just playing with the idea of the haunted house and talking to Jolie as I did it. Jolie has a very busy life, so she was necessarily going to be a couple steps behind me, but she caught up in like no time too. So we had these 5 stories. We kind of edited them together, found strengths or places to kind of strengthen connections and ideas. But at that point, it wasn't really supposed to be a mosaic novel. It was just going to be a chapbook of short stories. But then we were like, well, why don't we just submit this to Tenebris, who we both had a kind of a friendly connection with, and they really dug it. But they were like, hey, do you also want to write a novella to go with it? And we had enough fun writing the other half of Posthaste Manor. It was really, kind of a no-brainer for us to be like, oh yeah, let's give it a shot, see what we can do. And then we kind of settled on there because this was a little bit different. Instead of writing our own individual short stories, we'd have to intertwine a little bit more. So I think we actually had a whole ass outline, and we decided we'd have 2 different perspectives, and we ran with it, and it was a blast.
It's like same. It worked. Yeah, ditto. No, it's like the only group project in history that ended with 2 people still being friends. Like it really went incredibly well for both of us. I'm still, as an only child, I'm still surprised.
That is, like, to me, that is, is super impressive. Like writing a thing on your own is really hard, and then doing it with another person and accommodating a process that might not look like yours is also super challenging. And if I understand correctly, like you're not in the same place either, right? So this was probably totally done remotely.
Yep, we've never met in person, not once.
Oh wow,
this is as close as we've gotten. Yes.
Yeah.
One day.
Wow. So we've talked a lot about your careers leading up to the book, to the writing of it. So let's talk a little bit about Posthaste Manor itself. Right, very early on in the book, there is, in very big letters, never trust a house with a name. So please tell us why. Why should we not trust Posthaste Manor without spoiling anything too juicy? But tell us about, like, the house at the center of the story and sort of where it maybe came from between the 2 of you.
So for my end, a house with a name usually signifies something that has to do with class. And one of the reasons that I wanted the house to be a mansion is because I thought that like opulent displays of wealth I find very creepy. Like I just find it a little like, am I in a house? Am I like, where am I in a museum? Am I about to be killed? Like, and so that was part of it going into it, was me thinking about like class and houses and like how all of that, because I think at this point, like, you can't even write a haunted house novel without thinking about like class. Like it's like writing it without the ghosts, which actually technically we did, but like, some of them are ghosts. They're like, technically they're ghosts. They're ghost-y. And so that was part of going into the build of it for me. And then the other part that interested me was like, what would keep something like this going for so long? And so one of the structural things that I thought was so interesting was coming up with a different reason that everybody had moved in there. Because at a certain, like, there's a certain point where like we just admit that like everybody in town knows about this house. Like there's no way, but people keep moving in. And so when we got to do that, we got to really get into this like sort of emotional meat of like character driven stories built on top of this absolutely bizarre, deranged setting, we've layered, like, in my opinion, and Carson did it too, layered these very human and very tender stories on top of this absolutely wackadoo setting that we came up with.
All of that, 100%. The class aspect was a huge part for me as well. And you know, when we're talking about haunted houses, I feel like as horror writers, we're both very tangled up in the subject. We both loved horror, I'm sure, for our entire lives. We've encountered the haunted house, you know, within fiction time and time and time again. It's something that as a horror writer you almost feel compelled to comment on in one way or another, and to kind of bend and mold to express your own existence, your own life and stuff. What a house meant to someone, you know, in 1956 means something very different to me as a millennial who may never own a home.
That is something that actually really impressed me and kind of touches on what you were both talking about when you get to sort of like the reasons that people are moving into Posthaste Manor sort of over and over again. A lot of them are driven by sort of, like by economic reasons, which I think it does speak to, where we are as a country right now. But there is at least one character who's like, no, I know it's haunted, and like, like, let's go. Like, that's what so like,
there's always one.
Yeah. Yeah. But and this, like, to speak about that character too, like something that I think the book does really well is it's about the supernatural horror, but it's also, as you said, these like really intensely internal stories about like people and their very real flaws, like their fatal flaws, someone might say in some cases. But like so like, can you talk a little bit about how you approach like what you might call the external horror and the internal horror, and like that balance?
Take it away, Jolie.
All right, so for me, my horror is never my plot point. My horror, my supernatural, or whatever my locus of fears is, my metaphor. Do you know what I mean? And so what happens to me is that what I'm interested in is how these people are dealing with this. I'm not interested in how it came to be. I'm not interested in where it's going to go. I'm not interested in the contours of it, or like, I'm one of those people who really hates horror that explains it to you. Like, because one, like, that's not how the world works. The world is messy and confusing and devastating, and terrible things will happen, and nobody will ever tell you why. There's no reason why, because F you, that's why. Like, and so for me, really getting into like the mechanics of horror is not where my writing goes. I sort of like throw a weird pretense at the wall and then like pick a person out of a hat and go, how do they deal with this? And so there were actually a couple extra characters that that I didn't make it into the book. There was like a teenage girl who'd been forced to move into the house with her parents who didn't even want to be there. And like, to me, the way that I wrote it, what was going on in the house, though that is explained, wasn't the meat of it. What the meat of it was what's going on to everybody there and what it's doing. Though Posthaste is fun as an entity. And so that was part of it too. Like, I wanted to build a haunted house that wasn't just scary, that was a little bit like, that had like a little bit of like a nod and a wink to it.
Posthaste kind of reminds me a little bit, as a villain. It kind of reminds me of almost like the Deadites from Evil Dead, where they like seem to operate on their own logic. You can't really out logic any of the villains in the Evil Dead series. They just kind of do stuff, and it's like, and it's not bound by reality in any way, where it's like suddenly these monsters will like take a couple minutes to do like a Three Stooges gag out of nowhere, and they just think it's funny. Like, that's the only reason they're doing it. And it's like, what the fuck do you do with something like that is able to just act out little comedy bits on a whim and shit? And yeah, I think that's one of the things I really like about Posthaste Manor. the villain, the house with a name, is that it is this just, it's this absurd, unknowable entity that is really just throwing everything at the wall. Every single thing it has in its ammunition box, it's throwing out there because it's in the business of doing what it does, and you don't know what it does really, and you won't understand why. I also resonate a lot with what Jolie said about kind of not over explaining. In weird fiction, I consider myself a weird fiction writer, and one of kind of like what I would boil weird fiction down to is people bouncing off the unknowable. Unknowable concept happening, some kind of aberration, a distortion, much like Kafka's Metamorphosis. Guy turns into a bug. Nobody gives a shit how or why that happened. But the rest of the story is him bouncing off that new reality. And I think I took a similar approach in my half of Posthaste Manor, where it's about real people bouncing off the unknowable, and rather than solve it, because when you're dealing with the unknowable, you cannot solve the unknowable. You do have to make these stories, you have to fit them into the shape of a story. And the way you do that is by giving characters an arc. So whether, and I think that's kind of what forms the necessity in Posthaste Manor for having those characters have such strong internalizations, is because the externalization is so wacky, it will lead to nowhere. It can't lead to anywhere by design.
I do kind of like that, because I think, we've spent not we, but like the world has spent a lot of ink talking about like, elevated horror or dissertation horror, and like, oh, this is a metaphor for that. And I like that, like the goofiness, the zaniness, like almost like a sort of like Bugs Bunny energy that the house brings.
Yeah, anarchic.
Yeah. It like is like almost like resisting that, like, please do not ascribe one particular meaning to me, like sort of, and that is another form of not explaining and of like denying closure and stuff like that. And that might be why the story stays with you, because like stories that never tell us everything, we never get to be like, and that's that, and put it aside, so.
Yeah, I didn't even realize until Jolie said it earlier about it not really being about ghosts or anything. And I didn't even think about that. And I was like, yeah, I guess it's not really. I mean, Posthaste Manor has them. It has everything, but it's not really like set deep into ghosts world or anything.
I've said that the house isn't haunted so much as it's deranged.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and it's like enjoying it, haunted also sort of like implies a melancholia, sort of like the house really.
No, man. Posthaste Manor has been a haunted house for a long time, and it is confident in its abilities, and it has started having fun.
Yeah.
It is really a confident, competent haunted house.
Yep. Now I'm proud of, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it now. So far, it's so good at what it does. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for coming. And, just before we wrap up, like, for both of you, do you feel like there was anything that this collaboration imparted to you that you'll bring forward into your future writing?
Oh, geez, that's such a big question.
Sorry.
I think it's no, it's great. I think what it's going to give me is a lot more confidence in being able to take on these types of projects and stuff. I never saw myself as a co-writing person before, and I initiated the project, but it really has kind of bolstered my enthusiasm for the form, and it tested my creativity throughout it in really fun, valuable ways. So I feel like, much like Posthaste Manor, I am a much more confident writer.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's sort of the same thing, is that by working with Carson, I found my way into my own voice. I sort of fell into it. And some of the things that I'm going to take, like, Carson is so incredibly skilled that taking some of his technical stuff is just yoink. Sorry, that's mine now. Now we all write things in sparse prose. Too bad. And a lot of it was the ability of writing is so lonely in general as an art form. It's not a thing that you do. You write it, you finish it, and you're like, well, I guess this will be great when everybody reads it 3 years from now or not. Like it's just sort of like you put it away and you forget about it, and then it comes out later and there's like a little bit of confetti and like, or unless you get famous, and like that's sort of it. And so it really hammered home to me the importance of a kind of community. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a writing group. I think that too many cooks spoiling the soup is a real thing. But if you get like 2 or 3 people who are on your vibe, it can really take your art someplace new. And it's as valuable as anything that you could do yourself.
Very cool. Yeah, and it seems like that's something that like the press Tenebris is sort of leaning into too. Like they're kind of creating a horror community and supporting their writers.
Mhm.
And very
They
cool.
are
They're great.
great to work with. Love them.
Yeah, phenomenal to work with.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us. This has been really lovely. And I hope that, when you embark on your future projects, you'll consider coming back and sharing them with us because I really enjoyed this chat. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for having
having
us.
No problem. Okay, listeners, now it's on you. Go check out Posthaste Manor. It's out now. It'll be out when you listen to this episode. So go hit up your favorite library or independent bookstore, wherever you like to get your books. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.